The rain poured heavily onto the cracked pavement of the deserted alley. Neon lights from nearby shops flickered, reflecting off the puddles that littered the ground. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet concrete and distant danger. Lena pulled her hood tighter, her steps hurried but purposeful as she made her way home after a long shift at the restaurant. Each footstep echoed off the graffiti-covered walls, blending with the rhythm of raindrops falling around her. The neighborhood was notorious for its dangers. It was a place where shadows seemed to breathe, and whispers of crime and violence filled every corner. Lena had grown up in this area, navigating the risks with a mix of cautious wisdom and quiet strength. She knew the streets well, knew which alleys to avoid, which paths to take when darkness fell. As she turned a corner, a sense of unease settled in her chest. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp illuminated several figures lingering ahead, their postures tense and predatory. The gang known as the Claws ruled this part of the city, and it was clear that they had chosen tonight to claim another victim. "Hey there, sweetheart," one of them called out, his voice dripping with malicious amusement. "Where are you running off to in such a hurry?" Lena's heart quickened, but her expression remained calm. She came to a halt, her eyes scanning the group with sharp precision. There were 5 of them, each radiating an air of confidence born from a life of intimidation and brutality. They stepped forward, closing the distance, their boots splashing through puddles. "Leave me alone," Lena said evenly, her voice carrying a note of authority that belied her petite frame. She tightened her fists beneath the fabric of her jacket, her mind already calculating possible escape routes. The leader of the group, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, sneered. "Or what? You'll scream for help? Nobody's coming. You're in claw territory now." Lena's gaze never wavered, her eyes cold and unyielding. She could sense the fight that was brewing, the storm that loomed on the edge of action. The faces of the gang members were illuminated for brief moments by the neon lights, faces twisted with cruel amusement. She took a step back, feeling the roughness of the wall against her fingertips. The rain continued to fall, a constant drumbeat that underscored the tension. Memories of another time surfaced, flashes of intense training sessions under the watchful eye of her mentor Dante. His stern voice echoed in her mind. "Stay calm. Never let fear control you." Lena exhaled slowly, releasing her fear into the night. She watched as the gang members exchanged glances, eager for the thrill of confrontation. They saw only a fragile young woman, an easy target. "Come on, let's have some fun," the scarred man growled, raising a metal pipe in one hand. The moment stretched, a fragile thread on the verge of snapping. Lena's body tensed, a hidden strength coiling within her muscles, ready to be unleashed. But she held her ground, waiting for the right moment, her heart beating with steady resolve. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the alley seemed to close in around them, a narrow battlefield shrouded in rain and shadow. Lena met the eyes of her would-be attackers, her expression one of cold defiance. "You made a mistake," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm not as weak as you think." And with that, the storm finally broke. Lena's instincts took over as the scarred man lunged forward, his metal pipe slicing through the air toward her head. She ducked swiftly, the weapon missing her by mere inches and colliding with the wall behind her, sending shards of concrete flying. Without hesitation, she stepped to the side, twisting her body into a defensive stance. "You little—" the man spat, rage twisting his face as he swung again. Lena's movements were fluid, calculated. She evaded each attack with a precision that spoke of hours spent perfecting her skills. Her eyes narrowed as she seized the opportunity, delivering a sharp elbow to the man's ribs. He stumbled back, clutching his side, eyes wide with surprise. "What the hell?" one of the other gang members shouted, momentarily stunned by her agility. Lena's heart raced as she positioned herself strategically, her back to the wall, her gaze sweeping over the remaining members of the Claws. She was outnumbered, and she knew that brute force alone wouldn't save her. She needed to stay calm to outthink them. "Get her!" the scarred man barked, recovering from the blow. The rest of the gang surged forward, a wave of aggression and violence. Lena sidestepped a wild punch from one of the men, grabbing his outstretched arm and twisting it with practiced ease. He yelped in pain as his shoulder was wrenched out of position, and Lena shoved him into one of his comrades, sending them both tumbling to the ground. Rain continued to pour, the alley becoming slick and treacherous. Lena's feet slid slightly, and she steadied herself, her mind flashing back to her first days of training with Dante. She remembered his calm voice, guiding her through each movement, each strike. "Control the fight, Lena. Use their aggression against them." The words were a lifeline, grounding her in the chaos. She focused, stepping lightly as another gang member came at her with a knife. The blade glinted in the neon light, a deadly promise. Lena's pulse quickened, but she remained steady, her breath controlled. As the man lunged, Lena sidestepped, pivoting on her heel. She grabbed his wrist, using his momentum to drive the knife into the wall, embedding it deep into the concrete. Before he could react, she struck him hard on the back of the head, sending him crumpling to the ground. The scarred man's expression darkened with fury. "Enough of this!" he roared, motioning for the others to close in. Lena's eyes darted around, searching for an opening. But before she could make her move, the gang members tightened their circle, blocking her escape. Her breath quickened as she realized she was being cornered. "Looks like you're not getting away this time," the scarred man sneered, wiping rain from his brow. "You've got skills, I'll give you that. But you're still outnumbered." Lena clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had to think, had to find a way to shift the odds in her favor. She took a slow step forward, her movements deliberate and confident. "You think this is over?" she said, her voice cold and steady. "You have no idea who I am, and if you touch me, you'll regret it." The gang members hesitated, momentarily unsure. But the scarred man wasn't intimidated. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Big talk for someone trapped in an alley. Before Lena could respond, another memory flashed through her mind. One of her first encounters with Dante. She had been lost, scared, and desperate for guidance, and Dante had offered her a chance to become something more. The rain continued to fall, each drop a reminder of the fight she had chosen to avoid for so long. But now it seemed fate was forcing her hand. Lena exhaled slowly, her muscles tensing in anticipation. She had spent too much time running. Tonight, she would stand her ground. And as the gang members moved in, Lena prepared to show them just how much she had learned. The rain-soaked alley echoed with the sounds of conflict. Lena stood firm, her fists clenched as the members of the Claws advanced on her. The tension was palpable, and despite their numbers, Lena knew she had the upper hand in skill. She was no ordinary target, and they were about to find that out the hard way. One of the gang members rushed her with a feral growl, fists swinging wildly. Lena leaned back, letting the punch sail past her face before driving her knee into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air, and Lena wasted no time, delivering a swift strike to the side of his head. He dropped to the ground, motionless. Another gang member took his place, wielding a rusted metal pipe. Lena remembered Dante's words. "Weapons are extensions of fear. Disarm them and you disarm their courage." She watched as the man raised the pipe high, his intentions clear. She sidestepped his attack, her movements precise and fluid, then grabbed his wrist and twisted it sharply. The pipe clattered to the ground, lost in a puddle of rainwater. "You think you're tough?" the scarred leader sneered, wiping blood from his lip. "You're just another street rat trying to act tough, but this is our territory, and we don't take kindly to trespassers." Lena's lips curled into a faint smile, one that carried no amusement. "You're mistaken," she replied, her voice calm and deadly. "I'm not just another street rat. I've been trained by someone far more dangerous than any of you." The gang members exchanged uneasy glances. Despite their bravado, they were starting to sense that something was off about her, something different. And in that moment of hesitation, Lena saw her opening. She moved with lightning speed, closing the gap between herself and the scarred leader. Her fists found their mark with practiced precision, striking his jaw with a force that sent him reeling backward. He stumbled, barely catching himself before he fell. "That's impossible," he growled, his eyes blazing with anger. "Nobody fights like that unless they've had real training." Lena's expression remained unchanged. "That's right. And my mentor. He's a legend. You've probably heard of him, Dante." A murmur rippled through the gang. Dante's name carried weight in the city, a name whispered with a mix of fear and respect. The legendary warrior had long since retired, but his reputation was as formidable as ever. "Dante?" one of the gang members muttered, his voice tinged with doubt. "You're lying. There's no way someone like you trained under him." Lena stepped closer, her eyes locked on the scarred leader. "Believe what you want, but I suggest you walk away now before you regret it." The leader spat on the ground, defiance etched into his expression. "We're not afraid of some old ghost. You might have learned a few tricks, but you're still outnumbered." The gang pressed in again and Lena braced herself, drawing strength from every lesson Dante had ever taught her. She recalled the countless hours of training, the grueling drills that had pushed her beyond her limits. She remembered the pain, the sweat, the relentless pursuit of perfection. One of the gang members lunged at her, fists flying. Lena deflected his attack effortlessly, redirecting his momentum and sending him crashing into the wall. She moved with deadly grace, her strikes fast and unrelenting. She was a blur of motion, a storm unleashed. One by one, the gang members fell, their arrogance and overconfidence no match for Lena's skill. The rain poured harder, washing away the blood and sweat that stained the alley. Finally, only the scarred leader remained, breathing heavily, his expression a mixture of rage and fear. This isn't over," he snarled, clutching at his bruised jaw. "You'll regret crossing us, we'll make sure of it." Lena stood tall, unyielding. "You're welcome to try, but remember this. Your biggest mistake was thinking I was weak." The scarred leader hesitated for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Lena alone in the rain-soaked alley. As the rain continued to fall in relentless sheets, Lena stood alone in the alley, her breathing ragged, her muscles tense. The echoes of the battle lingered in the air, mingling with the distant hum of the city. She watched as the last of the claws disappeared into the shadows, their threats fading into the night. Lena knew she had won this fight, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at her. She felt a tremor of doubt as she looked down at her bruised knuckles. This was not what Dante had trained her for. He had always emphasized restraint, avoidance, and the pursuit of a life beyond violence. A memory surfaced, vivid and haunting. A lesson from Dante during one of their training sessions. The sun had set, and they stood in the old gym, surrounded by the smell of sweat and worn leather. "You have strength, Lena," Dante had said, his voice gentle yet firm. "But true strength is knowing when not to fight. Violence should always be the last resort." "But what if I'm cornered?" she had asked, desperation in her voice. "What if I have no other choice?" Dante's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. "In that moment, you will need to trust your instincts. You'll know what's right. But remember, violence has a way of spreading. It draws more violence. If you choose that path, be prepared for the consequences." Now standing in the rain-drenched alley, Lena felt the weight of those words. She had been cornered tonight, yes, but she had also made the choice to fight. And while she had won, the battle had left her with an unease that no victory could erase. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and turned to leave the alley. She could hear distant sirens, the faint pulse of emergency vehicles responding to some far-off chaos. This was her chance to slip away, to disappear into the night, and leave this fight behind. But as she stepped toward the street, she hesitated. She remembered the look of fear in the eyes of the gang members as they fled, and she realized that this fight might not be over. The claws would want revenge. They would come after her again, and they might target innocent people to get to her. She felt a pang of guilt as she realized the truth. If she walked away now, others might pay the price for her actions tonight. Dante had taught her to protect, to shield others from harm. But how could she do that without embracing the very violence she had been taught to avoid? Lena clenched her fists, the rain dripping from her fingertips like blood. She looked up at the dark sky, as if searching for an answer hidden among the storm clouds. She wanted to follow Dante's teachings, to walk away and find a peaceful path. But was that even possible in a world like this? She thought of the people in the neighborhood, the shopkeepers, the children playing on the corner. She thought of the fear they must feel every day, living under the shadow of gangs like the Claws. They deserved better. They deserved a chance to live without fear. Lena's resolve hardened, her doubt giving way to determination. She couldn't walk away, not this time. She couldn't stand by and allow others to suffer because of her decision to fight back. "I'll finish this," she whispered to herself, "but I'll do it my way." She turned on her heel and walked deeper into the night, her mind already racing with a plan. She would find a way to protect the people of this neighborhood, to stand up against the Claws without losing herself in the darkness. But the fight wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning, and Lena knew that her greatest test still lay ahead. Lena moved with quiet determination through the narrow streets, her senses alert for any sign of danger. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, and the neon glow of the city cast ghostly reflections on the wet pavement. She knew she couldn't face the Claws alone. If she wanted to end their reign of terror, she needed information, someone who knew the inner workings of the gang. That's when she remembered Victor, Victor had once been a member of the Claws, but he had disappeared from the streets a year ago, rumored to have broken ties with the gang. Lena didn't know much about him, but she had heard whispers that he was different, someone who had grown disillusioned with the gang's violent ways. If there was anyone who could help her, it was him. She made her way to an old garage on the edge of the neighborhood, a place she'd heard Victor had taken refuge. The building was dark, its broken windows covered with sheets of plywood, and the faint scent of oil and rust lingered in the air. She approached cautiously, tapping lightly on the metal door. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low voice echoed from within. "Who's there?" "Lena," she replied, her tone even but urgent. "I need your help, Victor. It's about the Claws." The door creaked open a few inches, and a pair of wary eyes peered out at her. Victor's face was partially obscured by shadow, but she could see the weariness etched into his features. "What do you want with me?" he asked, his voice guarded. Lena took a step closer, lowering her hood to reveal her face. "I ran into the Claws tonight. They attacked me, and I fought back. Now they'll be coming after me, and anyone else who gets in their way." Victor's expression darkened. He opened the door wider, gesturing for her to come inside. "We shouldn't talk out here." She stepped into the dimly lit garage, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. The space was cluttered with old tools and scrap metal, a makeshift sanctuary carved out of chaos. Victor locked the door behind her, then turned to face her with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You fought them off?" he asked, folding his arms across his chest. "Not many people can say that." "I was trained by someone who knows how to fight," Lena said simply. "But that's not why I'm here. I want to stop them, Victor. I want to end their hold over this neighborhood, and I think you know how to make that happen." Victor's gaze flickered with something. Hope, maybe, or perhaps regret. He leaned against a workbench, rubbing a hand over his stubble-covered jaw. "You don't know what you're getting into. The Claws aren't just a gang. They're a network, and their leader, Reaper, won't stop until he gets what he wants." "And what does he want?" Lena pressed. "Power, control, fear," Victor said bitterly. "He thrives on it. I used to be part of that machine, but I got out when I realized I couldn't live with the things they were doing." Lena stepped closer, her voice softening. "I don't want to drag you back into this, but if you have any information that can help me, it could make all the difference." Victor hesitated, his eyes searching hers for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "There's a safe house on the west side, near the old train yard. It's where Reaper and his lieutenants meet to plan their operations. If you hit them there, you might be able to cut the head off the snake." Lena nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Thank you. I'm going to stop him, and I'm going to protect this neighborhood. But I could use someone like you, someone who knows their tactics." Victor let out a dry chuckle. "You're crazy, you know that. Taking on the Claws by yourself?" "I'm not alone anymore," Lena said, offering him a faint smile. "Am I?" Victor sighed, then pushed away from the workbench. "All right, I'm in. But if we're going to do this, we do it smart. No reckless heroics." "Agreed," Lena said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Let's make sure they never hurt anyone here again." Victor led Lena through a series of narrow alleys, his movements swift and confident as they made their way toward the old train yard. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp and cool. The city was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of the coming storm. Lena's pulse quickened as they approached the edge of the train yard. Rusted tracks crisscrossed the ground, and rows of abandoned freight cars loomed in the darkness like forgotten sentinels. Victor stopped, pressing his back against a crumbling brick wall as he scanned the area. "This is it," he whispered, nodding toward a low, squat building near the center of the yard. The faint glow of light seeped through the cracks in its boarded-up windows. "That's the safe house. Reaper and his top lieutenants should be inside." Lena peered into the shadows, her eyes narrowing as she spotted two gang members standing guard near the entrance. They looked bored, their postures relaxed, but Lena knew better than to underestimate them. "Two guards," she murmured. "We take them out quietly, then move inside." Victor nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've done this before, haven't you?" "I've been trained," Lena said simply. "Let's move." They crept forward, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as they closed in on the guards, her senses honed to razor-sharp focus. She moved with silent precision, her muscles coiled like a spring. When they were close enough, Lena struck. She clamped a hand over one guard's mouth, dragging him backward into the shadows as she applied pressure to a nerve in his neck. The man's eyes widened in shock before he crumpled, unconscious, to the ground. Victor took care of the second guard, a swift strike that sent the man slumping against the wall. He met Lena's gaze and they exchanged a brief nod of understanding. "Let's go," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. They slipped inside the safe house, moving like shadows through the narrow hallways. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and old cigarettes. Lena's pulse quickened as they approached a doorway at the end of the hall. She could hear voices inside, low and tense. She pressed her ear against the door, listening intently. Reaper's deep, gravelly voice carried through the air, sending a chill down her spine. He was discussing plans, territory expansion, intimidation tactics, and a new wave of violence that would cement the Claw's dominance over the city. "We can't let this happen," Lena whispered, her eyes blazing with determination. "We end it here." Victor's jaw tightened. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Lena's thoughts flashed back to her training with Dante, to the lessons he had drilled into her time and time again. She drew strength from his teachings, from the fire he had ignited within her. "I'm ready," she said. They burst into the room, catching Reaper and his lieutenants off guard. Chaos erupted as shouts and curses filled the air. Reaper sprang to his feet, his eyes narrowing in fury as he took in the sight of Lena and Victor standing before him. "You," he spat, his lips curling into a sneer. "I should have killed you in that alley." "You're going to pay for what you've done," Lena shot back, her voice steady and resolute. Reaper's lieutenants rushed forward, drawing weapons, but Lena and Victor were ready. They moved in tandem, a whirlwind of motion as they fought side by side. Lena's strikes were precise and lethal, honed by years of training under Dante's watchful eye. Victor fought with the raw intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The room was a blur of fists and fury, of desperate shouts and the clash of metal on wood. Lena fought with everything she had, pouring her anger, her pain, and her determination into every blow. As the last lieutenant fell, Reaper stood alone, breathing heavily, his eyes dark with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." Lena took a step closer, her gaze cold and unyielding. "We'll see about that." Reaper lunged, and the fight for control of the neighborhood and Lena's future had truly begun. Lena and Victor stood in the aftermath of the battle, the room littered with unconscious gang members. Reaper had escaped through a side door, leaving behind a trail of chaos and rage. Lena clenched her fists, determination hardening her resolve. They needed a plan, something that would end this once and for all. Victor leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We can't keep fighting them head-on like this. They'll just keep coming, and eventually they'll overwhelm us." Lena nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to be smarter. We can't just take out Reaper and his lieutenants. We need to dismantle the entire operation." Victor arched an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "We turn the city into a chessboard," Lena said, her voice steady. "We lure them into traps, hit them where they're weakest, and make it impossible for them to continue. We take away their power, piece by piece." Victor's lips curled into a faint smile. "You really did learn from Dante, didn't you?" Lena's eyes glimmered with determination. "He taught me that fear is a weapon. If we can make Reaper's men afraid, we can control them." Victor pushed himself off the wall, newfound energy sparking in his eyes. "All right, let's do this. We'll need to target their supply lines, their safe houses, and any place they use to intimidate people. We can use the city itself," Lena said, gesturing out the window at the rain-soaked streets. "We set traps in the places they feel most secure. We turn their strongholds into their biggest weaknesses." They spent the next few hours planning, mapping out every possible angle of attack. Lena used her knowledge of the neighborhood to identify key locations where they could strike. Victor provided insider information, detailing the routines and weaknesses of Reaper's men. As dawn approached, their plan was complete. It was a strategy that relied on precision, deception, and an unrelenting assault on Reaper's power base. "We need to move fast," Lena said. "The longer we wait, the more time Reaper has to regroup." Victor nodded. "Let's start with their main safe house. If we can take that out, it'll send a message to the rest of them." They moved quickly, slipping through the city like shadows. Lena's heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement as they approached their first target, a nondescript building in the heart of the neighborhood. It looked ordinary, but Lena knew it was a hub for Reaper's operations. They set their trap carefully, using a combination of firecrackers, makeshift smoke bombs, and strategically placed debris. It wasn't about causing physical destruction. It was about creating chaos, confusion, and fear. When the trap was set, they retreated to a safe distance and waited. Moments later, Reaper's men arrived, their faces twisted with confusion as smoke billowed from the building. The sound of firecrackers echoed through the streets, and the gang members panicked, shouting orders and scrambling to contain the chaos. Lena watched from the shadows, a cold satisfaction settling in her chest. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. They repeated the process at several more locations, each strike more precise than the last. Reaper's men grew increasingly desperate, their fear evident in the way they moved, their eyes constantly darting toward unseen threats. As night fell, Lena and Victor stood atop a rooftop, surveying the city below. The neighborhood was quieter now, the gang's presence noticeably diminished. "They're losing control," Victor said, a note of hope in his voice. "They're afraid." Lena nodded, her gaze focused on the horizon. "But we can't stop now. We need to keep pushing until Reaper has nowhere left to turn." Victor's expression grew serious. "There's one more thing you should know. Reaper has a backup plan, a last resort. If he feels cornered, he'll target the people you're trying to protect. He'll make them pay." Lena's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance." They spent the rest of the night refining their strategy, preparing for the final confrontation with Reaper. Lena knew that the next step would be the most dangerous yet, but she was ready. She had made a promise to protect this neighborhood, and she intended to keep it. The hunt was far from over, but with every step they took, Lena and Victor were one move closer to ending Reaper's reign of terror. The air was thick with tension as Lena and Victor stood in the shadows of the old warehouse, the final stronghold of the Claws. The dim glow of lights inside revealed the outlines of armed figures, and Lena could sense the urgency radiating from Reaper's men. They were cornered, and desperate men were dangerous. Victor's voice was low, almost a whisper. "This is it. If we hit them here, we can take down Reaper once and for all." Lena's eyes narrowed as she scanned the area, searching for weaknesses. "We'll need to draw them out. If we go in there head-on, it'll be a bloodbath." Victor nodded. "We can create a distraction near the main entrance, force them to split their forces. Once they're disoriented, we strike." As they finalized their plan, Victor's expression grew somber. "There's something I haven't told you, Lena, about Reaper." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Victor hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Reaper isn't just another gang leader. He has a personal connection to you. He knows who you are, who you really are." A chill ran down Lena's spine. "What are you talking about?" "Years ago, when Dante was still active, he took down a powerful syndicate that was running this neighborhood. Reaper was part of that syndicate, but he managed to escape. He blames Dante for everything he lost, and he found out that Dante trained you. He sees you as his way to get revenge." Lena's breath caught in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. She remembered Dante's cryptic warnings about enemies from his past, shadows that would one day come for her. She had always thought it was just his way of keeping her vigilant, but now she understood that it had been a very real threat. "So this isn't just about territory," Lena said softly. "It's personal." Victor's expression was grim. "And there's more. Reaper knows about your past, your family. He knows what happened to them." Lena's blood ran cold. She had spent years trying to bury that pain, to move on from the tragedy that had shaped her life. But if Reaper knew the truth, he could use it against her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I can't let him have that power over me," Lena whispered. "I need to face him." "End this." Victor nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Then let's finish what we started." They moved into position, setting their distraction in motion. Smoke billowed from the front entrance, and shouts erupted from inside the warehouse as Reaper's men scrambled to respond. Chaos spread through the building, and Lena and Victor slipped through a side entrance, moving like shadows through the maze of crates and machinery. They found Reaper in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by his remaining lieutenants. His presence was commanding, a dark figure radiating power and menace. He turned as Lena and Victor approached, a twisted smile curling on his lips. "So the prodigy finally shows herself," Reaper sneered. "I was hoping we'd get a chance to meet face to face." Lena's expression was cold and resolute. "This ends tonight, Reaper. You've terrorized this neighborhood long enough." Reaper laughed, a low, menacing sound. "You sound just like your mentor. So righteous, so noble. But Dante was a fool, and so are you." Lena took a step forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You want revenge for what Dante did? Fine, but leave these people out of it. They don't deserve to suffer because of your hatred." Reaper's eyes narrowed. "You think I care about collateral damage? This neighborhood is just a tool, a means to an end. And when I'm done with you, I'll finish what I started with Dante." Rage surged through Lena, but she kept her focus, her body poised for action. "You made a mistake coming after me, Reaper. I'm not a scared little girl anymore. I'm Dante's legacy, and I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." Reaper's sneer twisted into a snarl. "Then let's see if you're as strong as you think you are." He lunged forward, and the final battle began, a clash of skill, fury, and determination. Lena fought with everything she had, pouring her pain, her strength, and her resolve into every strike. She was no longer fighting just for herself, but for the people Dante had sworn to protect, and for the future she refused to let Reaper destroy. Lena moved with deadly precision, her body a blur of motion as she blocked Reaper's initial strike. The warehouse echoed with the sound of fists colliding, boots scraping against concrete, and the harsh, ragged breathing of two warriors locked in a life-or-death struggle. Reaper was relentless, his attacks brutal and unyielding. He fought with the raw fury of a man driven by hatred, each punch and kick carrying the weight of his vendetta against Dante. Lena parried his strikes, her movements fluid and controlled. She had been trained for this moment, prepared for this battle by the very man Reaper despised. "You've inherited Dante's arrogance," Reaper snarled, his voice laced with venom. "You think you're better than me? You think you can stop me?" Lena's expression remained calm, her breathing steady despite the strain of the fight. "I don't think, Reaper. I know." She ducked beneath his next attack, sweeping his legs out from under him with a swift kick. Reaper hit the ground hard, but he rolled to his feet almost immediately, his eyes blazing with rage. "You're nothing," he spat, circling her like a predator. Just a scared little girl hiding behind Dante's shadow. Lena felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to stay focused. "You're wrong. I'm not in anyone's shadow. I'm here to end this, not just for Dante, but for everyone you've hurt." Reaper's sneer twisted into a snarl, and he lunged at her again, his fists swinging with reckless abandon. Lena met his fury with precision, blocking and countering his attacks with calculated efficiency. She drove her elbow into his ribs, forcing a pained grunt from him, and followed up with a sharp punch to his jaw. Reaper staggered back, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Lena saw a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "You're good," he admitted grudgingly. "Better than I expected. But you're still alone, and that's your weakness." A sinister smile spread across his face as he glanced over Lena's shoulder. She realized too late that Reaper's lieutenants had regrouped, closing in around her and Victor with murderous intent. Victor stepped forward, his stance tense and ready. "We're not alone, Lena. We've got each other." Reaper laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "Touching, but it won't be enough." He snapped his fingers, and his lieutenants rushed forward, weapons gleaming in the dim light. Lena and Victor fought side by side, a whirlwind of fists, feet, and sheer determination. The battle was fierce, and for every opponent they took down, another seemed to rise in his place. Lena's muscles ached, and her breathing grew ragged. She could feel her strength waning, the relentless onslaught of enemies pushing her closer to the edge of exhaustion. But she refused to give in. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let Reaper win. Victor shouted a warning, and Lena turned just in time to see Reaper charging at her, a knife glinting in his hand. She sidestepped the attack, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, and Reaper's face contorted with pain. "You're finished," Lena hissed, tightening her grip on his arm. "It's over." Reaper's lips curled into a vicious smile. "Not yet." With a surge of strength, he wrenched his arm free and drove his shoulder into Lena's chest, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, her back hitting the wall, and Reaper's hand closed around her throat, pinning her in place. "You think you can take me down?" he growled, his grip tightening. "You're nothing without Dante." Lena's vision blurred, and she struggled for air, her fingers clawing at Reaper's hand. She thought of Dante's voice, his teachings, and the unbreakable bond they had shared. She focused, drawing strength from within, and with one final surge of energy, she drove her knee into Reaper's stomach. He gasped, his grip loosening just enough for Lena to break free. She followed up with a powerful strike to his temple, sending him crashing to the ground. Reaper lay motionless, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with disbelief. Lena stepped over him, her voice cold and steady. "It's over, Reaper. This is the end of your reign." Reaper struggled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and fury. His breathing was ragged, each inhale and exhale a reminder of his defeat at Lena's hands. But there was something in his eyes, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. "You think you've won?" he spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think beating me here changes anything?" Lena stood tall, her fists clenched, her expression unwavering. "I'm not here for victory, Reaper. I'm here to end your reign of terror. You've hurt too many people, and it stops now." Reaper's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You have no idea what's coming. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game." He raised his hand, and from the shadows stepped a figure that sent a chill down Lena's spine. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes as cold as steel. Lena's heart dropped as she realized who he was. "Meet my teacher," Reaper sneered. "The man who trained me, the man who once stood against Dante. He's here to finish what I started." The figure stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. "Lena," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "I've been waiting for this moment." Lena's mind raced. This man was no ordinary adversary. He was a force of nature, someone who had gone toe-to-toe with Dante himself. She felt the weight of the battle pressing down on her, the enormity of the challenge she now faced. "You trained Reaper," Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "You taught him how to spread fear and violence." The man nodded, a cold smile on his lips. "And now I'll teach you what it means to be powerless." He moved with speed that belied his size, his attacks precise and devastating. Lena barely managed to block the first strike, her body reeling from the force of the impact. She could feel the power radiating from him, the experience and skill that made him so deadly. Victor tried to intervene, but Reaper stepped in, blocking him with a vicious punch that sent him sprawling. "This fight is between her and the Master," Reaper growled. "Stay out of it." Lena's mind flashed back to her training with Dante. She remembered his lessons, his insistence on using her opponent's strength against them. She focused, drawing on everything she had learned, and shifted her stance. The man's next attack came, a flurry of punches and kicks that tested Lena's limits. She moved with fluidity, deflecting his strikes, using his momentum to weaken his balance. She struck back, landing a solid hit to his side, but he barely flinched. "You're strong," the man said, his tone almost approving. "But strength alone won't save you." Lena gritted her teeth, determination burning in her eyes. "It's not just strength, it's conviction." She moved with newfound purpose, her attacks fueled by the desire to protect the people she cared about. She fought not for herself, but for Dante's legacy, for Victor, and for the neighborhood that deserved peace. The man's composure began to crack as Lena's strikes grew more powerful, more precise. She saw an opening, a weakness in his defense, and seized it. She drove her elbow into his chest, forcing him back, and followed up with a sweep that sent him crashing to the ground. He looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible. It's over," Lena said, her voice resolute. "You lost because you fight for power. I fight for something greater." Reaper, realizing that his last hope had failed, stumbled back in fear. "You can't do this. You can't just end this." Lena's gaze was cold as she stepped toward him. "Watch me." She delivered a final, decisive blow that sent Reaper collapsing to the ground. The room fell into silence, the weight of victory settling over Lena like a storm breaking. Victor struggled to his feet, breathing heavily. "We did it. You did it." Lena nodded, exhaustion washing over her. "It's over. The claws are finished." As the sun began to rise, Lena and Victor stepped out of the warehouse, the neighborhood bathed in the soft, golden light of dawn. For the first time in years, the streets felt peaceful, free from the shadow of violence. But as Lena looked into the distance, she saw a figure watching her from the shadows, a reminder that while this battle was won, there were still threats lurking in the darkness. "This isn't the end," Lena said quietly, "but we're ready for whatever comes next." Victor smiled, his eyes filled with hope. Together. Lena took a deep breath, her heart steady. The fight wasn't over, but she knew they would face whatever came their way, stronger, united, and unbreakable. The streets of the neighborhood were quieter now, the air filled with a sense of tentative peace. The chaos that had once reigned over this place, fueled by fear and violence, had finally been quelled. Lena stood in the fading light of dawn, her breath steady, her mind still processing the battle she had just fought and won. Victor stood beside her, his presence a comforting anchor in the aftermath of the storm. The neighborhood, once held hostage by the claws, was beginning to feel like a place of hope again. It was a slow process, but the first steps toward healing had been taken. "I never thought we'd make it through," Victor said quietly, his gaze scanning the now quiet streets. "But you did it. You ended it." Lena's gaze drifted toward the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "We ended it," she corrected softly. "Together." There was a heavy silence between them, the weight of the past few hours settling in, the destruction, the violence. It had all led to this moment. But even in the victory, there was something Lena couldn't shake. The knowledge that while the claws had been defeated, the darkness that lurked in the city wasn't gone. It was only waiting, biding its time. "Do you think it's really over?" Victor asked, sensing the unease that lingered in the air. Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. "No, but I'm ready for whatever comes next." She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We'll be ready." With that, they turned and walked away from the warehouse, leaving behind the ghosts of their enemies and stepping into the uncertain future. United, resolute, and determined to protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve,